In this part of the course, we will discuss the topic of inflation. Inflation is also known as loss in purchasing power or an increase in the general price level. We will cover three central questions. We will start with the question, what exactly is inflation? Then we will discuss why inflation is important in pension finance. Last but not least, we will explain how inflation can be taken into account when planning for retirement. Inflation describes an increase in the general level of prices of goods and services. Assume your monthly spending on clothing, housing, food, etc. were 1,000 euros in a given year. 1 year later, you buy the exact same goods and services. You still live in the same house. However, due to price increases that happened in the meantime, you have to spend 1,020 now to receive the same basket of goods and services. This graph should remind you of the section on interest rates. An increase from 1,000 to 1,020 corresponds to an interest rate, or in this case, because it is about price increases, we call it an inflation rate of 2%. We take up an example from the section on interest rates and use it to illustrate the role of inflation in this context. At an interest rate of 5%, a savings payment of 1,000 leads to a future value of 1,050 1 year later. The question now is, has our wealth really increased by 5%? Meaning, can we afford to buy 5% more of goods and services? The answer to this question depends on how the level of prices has developed during this year. At an inflation rate of 0, when prices do not rise at all, we can indeed afford 5% more in terms of goods and services after receiving 5% interest. However, at an inflation rate of 2%, for example, we already know that goods and services worth 1,000 today will cost 1,020 1 year later. Therefore, our wealth has only seemingly increased by 5%. Due to the increase in prices in the same period, we cannot afford to buy 5% more in terms of goods and services, but only about 3%. The impact of inflation can be approximated by subtracting the inflation rate from the interest rate. In our example, this gives 5% interest rate minus 2% inflation rate, which yields a 3% increase in the amount of goods and services we can afford 1 year from now. These 3% are often referred to as the real interest rate. The real interest rate is approximately equal to the difference between the nominal interest rate, here 5%, and the inflation rate, here 2%.